When you aren't clear about the four different ways that you could possibly handle any emotion that comes to you, then you are at essentially the mercy of your emotions and you end up getting pushed and pulled by your emotions. In essence, you start to live life on autopilot and the emotions essentially run you like programs. I mean, I'm sure if you look in your own life, you can identify certain people that when they are flooded by an emotion, they start to be controlled by that emotion. That emotion is now a program that is running them. It is determining their behavior and it's determining their actions. So by knowing the four different ways that you can handle any emotion that comes to you, it puts you back in a place of power. And towards the end of this video, I'm going to be sharing with you the most effective way on how to handle emotions. So stay tuned for that. Now, if you're new here, I'm Dr. Sean Golden, and this is Golden Mind Method. And here we show you how to remove the garbage from your mind so that you can gain lasting happiness and freedom, and so that you can start to live life on your own terms. Now, again, in this video, we're going to go over the four different ways that you can handle any emotion. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. The first one is probably the most common way that all of us use to kind of escape or get rid or go away from our emotions, and that is suppression, or if it gets bad enough, repression. So what is suppression? Suppression is when we simply overlook an emotion. Throughout the day, this happens hundreds of times, and most of us are not even aware that this is occurring. It kind of happens just below our level of awareness, mainly because it's so routine and we do it all the time. It's just such an ingrained habit. So what is suppression? Suppression is, you come home and maybe, things aren't maybe quite as clean as you would have hoped for. Or maybe you go out with your friends and someone says something to you that just kind of gets you the wrong way. It kind of makes you a little upset, it makes you a little annoyed, but you just kind of sweep it under the rug. You don't deal with it. Or maybe your significant other says something to you that, again, just kind of irks you a little bit, but you say to yourself, it's not a big deal, and you throw it under the rug. Now, what suppression is you're not actually handling that emotion. You're sweeping it under the rug. You're overlooking it. You're ignoring it. All of those are suppressing emotions. And the way you know you're suppressing emotions is because it ends up bubbling up later on and turning into something much larger. Essentially, those suppressed emotions start to build on top of one another. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're driving along the expressway and someone just cuts you off. They get really close to you. They didn't have to get that close. And they cut you off and they speed away. And it gets you upset. It gets you angry. So you're angry for a few moments. And then you tell yourself, okay, I don't want to be angry. I'm just going to let this go. And you just kind of go on throughout the rest of your day. Now, did you actually let it go, or did you suppress it? Well, the next day, let's say someone cuts you off again, and you get angry again, but this time, it reminded you of the previous day. And it's almost like those two emotions build on top of each other. The anger from the previous day, and now the anger from today. And you get so mad, you get even more mad than you would have if the previous day didn't happen. So that's suppression. In another way, if there are these little comments being made by one of your friends or your partner, and they just kind of get to you over and over, but you just ignore them, you let it go, and over time it just kind of builds up, and one day you just explode at them. Or, if someone does that to you, you said something to them, seemingly innocent, and you get a reaction from them, or explosion, or some type of emotional reaction that you were not expecting. Usually that's because they are responding from suppressed emotions that have now bubbled up and are now being expressed, which is leading into our next way that we can deal with our emotions, which is expression. So again, suppression or repression is the most common. If a memory is repressed, then that means that the trauma associated with that memory was just so strong that the unconscious mind it actually gets stored in the unconscious mind. And sometimes you don't even have access to that unless something happens later on in life that really brings it out, or in a therapeutic session or something like that. But even repressed memories will still vastly influence our behavior and thoughts and feelings. Now, when we move from suppression to expression, it's a little bit of a better situation, but not always that much better. You see, when we suppress emotions, we are completely ignoring them, we're sweeping them under the rug, but they are coming back to bite us. They're coming back to affect us, usually in worse ways later on than if we would have just dealt with them in the beginning. Now, when you express an emotion, you are, in a sense, letting some of it out. So let's say you're really angry at someone. Instead of just ignoring it, suppressing it, biting your tongue and moving on, you now are expressing it. Whether that is just, plainly telling them how you feel in an angry tone, or just all out rage mode, letting them know exactly how you feel. Either way, it's some type of expression. Now, with expression, you do let off some steam. And in that sense, in terms of it being healthier for you psychologically, it is better than suppression. Especially if you can express it in a way that lets off some steam, but isn't directly harmful to the other person or something like that. However, sometimes when it comes to certain emotions, expressing them can be very problematic, especially if that emotion is telling us to do something physically harmful, or something that we would regret later on, which is often the case when our emotions are directing our behavior like that. So, expression, while most people will tell you is the best way to handle emotions, it's actually not. Because in some ways it's inappropriate. And in other times, when you are expressing an emotion clearly to that person, then you could be doing something that later on you're going to regret, and likely the communication isn't going to be the best way to communicate in terms of actually being effective to get across what you want to get across, or to make the change that you want to make or want the other person to make. If you weren't in the grip of that emotion, but still were trying to make that change, you probably would be able to communicate that more effectively. So that there are a few reasons why expression isn't the most optimal. Another reason is sometimes, even though expression can kind of let off some steam, it can also kind of reinforce the emotion. It doesn't necessarily let part of it go. For an example, if let's say you're upset at your significant other, and then you go to one of your best friends and you just vent to them about this, and you're expressing it, and sometimes that can let some of it off your chest. But if that person just starts agreeing with you and feeding you and saying, yeah, you should be upset, that's terrible of what they did, they should never have done that, blah, blah, blah. And then you get even more indignant and you get even more mad. You're like, yeah, they shouldn't have done that. And I'm so upset at them and blah. And it could have just increased your emotion even more. So once again, expression is not, contrary to popular opinion, the best way to deal with emotions. Now, the third way that you can deal with emotions is by escaping them. And this is right behind suppression in terms of how often we use this mechanism to deal with our emotions. So when we try to escape emotions, what we're essentially doing is trying to turn to another behavior or another thought or something else so that we don't have to deal with this emotion. It is sort of a form of escape, or it is sort of a form of suppression in a sense, but it's a little different because we are now using another behavior to completely ignore that emotion. And what that ends up doing is it ends up setting up either addictive behaviors or dependent behaviors. We become dependent upon certain things in order to give us escape from our negative feelings and our negative emotions. So for a lot of people, this could be going for food. You can go for food in order to escape emotions. It could be going for a cigarette. It could be going for drugs or alcohol. Or, even just something as simple as turning on the TV at the end of the day and just trying to escape our emotions is a form of escape. Now, with a lot of those things that I just listed, it isn't like it's terrible to do them ever. That's not the point. The point is, when they get set up as a dependency or as an addiction, with the reason being to escape emotions, then that escape mechanism is a way that we are essentially suppressing our emotions or not dealing with them, and they're just going to compound over time and usually contribute to stress and get worse and worse. If you think of anyone that really has a lot of ways to escape emotions or is dependent on an addiction or a behavior in order to escape their emotions, not only do they not do a good job at actually letting their emotions go because they're just overlooking them and the emotions come back, it's only a temporary escape. But more than that, it sets up other problems. It sets up, if you go for food, then maybe you'll gain weight or maybe your health will get worse. So it sets up these other problems down the road because you're now dependent upon something in order for you to escape from your negative feelings for a little while. So, of course, escape is not the best way to let go of your emotions. So, number 4, what is the best way to deal with your emotions? And if you haven't guessed it by now or you haven't been to this channel, it is by releasing or letting go of your emotions. And this isn't something esoteric or something woo-woo or something that, we never do before. We actually do this a lot. We just aren't aware of it. Let me give you an example of how we naturally let go of an emotion. I told you earlier about that story where someone got cut off and they got angry. And then the next day they got cut off again. And because they suppressed that first day's emotion, it made the second day's emotion even worse. You can imagine if they got cut off every single day of the week, they would just go crazy. But what happens if they let it go? Now, how would they let it go? Because most people don't just actually let that emotion go. But what if after the first time they got cut off, they went to work and someone at work told them, hey, that car that cut you off that you're telling me about, I actually know who was in that car. And she was about to have a baby. They were rushing to the hospital. In that moment, you could let go of that anger. And for the rest of the day, if you think about that incident that happened, you're no longer angry about it. And you're not suppressing it. You let it go. Now, in this case, you convinced yourself that you could let it go because of a rational reason. You see, the reason that they were pregnant was enough for you to decide to let it go. Now, what I teach here is you can actually learn how to let any emotion go, regardless of whether there's a rational reason for it or not, just because it's the best thing to do in that situation. If you don't know about, or if you haven't seen the video on where I teach you how to release an emotion, make sure you check that out above here. I'm going to put a link to it above here. Go to that so you can actually learn the mechanism on how to release. And of course, there's tons and tons of benefits that come to actually releasing or letting go of emotions, many of which you might not have thought of before. If you haven't seen the first video I did on the benefits of releasing emotions, make sure you also check that out here. I'll leave a link to it above as well, so you can see that if you're interested. Now, again, if that person let go of that emotion, that anger that the person cut them off, the next day, if another person were to cut them off, that previous day's anger is no longer there. And so it wouldn't compound. It wouldn't build up. And just, in any situation, if you were having arguments with your significant other, or if your significant other was doing things that aggravated you, and you actually let those emotions go, it wouldn't build up and you wouldn't explode. That doesn't mean you can't take action. That doesn't mean you can't talk to them. In fact, if you choose to talk to them about it and you let the emotions go ahead of time, your communication is going to be much more effective, and the outcome that you want to actually happen will be much more likely to happen. So, the most effective way of dealing with emotions, and number 4, is releasing or letting go. And that literally means the emotion is gone. It is coming out. And when you truly let something go, you can't get it back. And you can experience this for yourself if you start to learn how to release emotions. Once it's gone, if you release an emotion about a particular situation, for example, once it's gone, and it doesn't come back. Even if you tried to make it come back, it wouldn't come back. So that's true releasing, and that's true letting go. And that's by far the most effective way because it lowers your stress levels. It allows you to be more effective with your communication. It allows you to take better actions, more deliberate and intentful actions, and actions that will be more likely to have a positive and beneficial outcome for everyone involved. So again, I hope you enjoyed learning about the 4 different ways that you can handle your emotions. If you have any questions, if you need clarifications, if you have any comments, make sure you leave them in the comments below. I love hearing what you guys have to say. I love reading and replying to your comments and answering any questions that I can. So I hope this served you, and I'll see you in the next video.